Disturbing new details in the death of Melissa Mooney have emerged. The model was found dead in her downtown LA apartment on September 12th. Now local affiliate KTLA says it has obtained Mooney's autopsy report, and it reveals shocking details as to how she died. Per KTLA citing the report, Melissa's body was found bound, beaten, and wedged inside her own refrigerator.
You're scrolling through Instagram, looking at a beautiful young woman's photos from just days ago. She's smiling, confident, living her dream life in a luxury downtown apartment. But right now, as you're seeing these happy moments, her lifeless body is already hidden inside her own refrigerator, placed there by someone she trusted with her life. This isn't fiction. This is the horrifying true story of how 31-year-old model and real estate professional Melissa Mooney's generous heart led to her brutal murder in September 2023, and why her killer's capture would reveal a pattern of violence that should have been stopped years earlier. On September 12, 2023, at exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, Los Angeles police officers forced their way into a luxury apartment in downtown LA. They weren't expecting to find anything unusual. After all, this was just a routine welfare check requested by worried family members. The building was secure, the neighborhood was safe, and missing persons cases usually ended with simple explanations. But what they discovered inside apartment would haunt these seasoned officers for the rest of their careers. The front door opened to reveal what looked like a normal living space. Everything seemed perfectly in place. Designer furniture sat exactly where it should. Expensive artwork hung straight on the walls. Nothing appeared disturbed or out of place. But then they noticed something strange in the kitchen. Food was left out on the counter, as if someone had been preparing a meal and simply walked away mid-preparation. For experienced investigators, these small details immediately felt wrong. Normal people don't just abandon their food and disappear for days. Then came the discovery that would change everything. A dark, thick liquid was slowly seeping from beneath the refrigerator, creating a pool on the pristine kitchen floor. The officers knew immediately what they were looking at, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found when they opened that refrigerator door. Inside, crammed into a space meant for food and drinks, was the body of Melissa Mooney. She was bound with electrical cords, gagged, and wearing only her underwear. The positioning of her body and the obvious signs of violence told investigators they were staring at the aftermath of a deliberately brutal attack. But who was Melissa Mooney, and how did a young woman with everything going for her end up as the victim of such a horrific crime? Understanding her story makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking. Melissa Marie Mooney was born on October 16, 1991, and by age 31, she had built exactly the kind of life that most people dream about. She was beautiful, smart, and incredibly driven. After landing a position with a prestigious real estate company, she had moved into her luxury downtown Los Angeles apartment just 1 month before her death. This move was supposed to represent a fresh chapter in her life, filled with independence, professional success, and unlimited possibilities. Melissa wasn't just another pretty face trying to make it in Los Angeles. She had the complete package. Her natural beauty and confident presence made her perfect for modeling, but she also possessed the business intelligence and people skills that made her extremely successful in real estate. Friends and colleagues described her as someone who could walk into any room and immediately make everyone feel comfortable and valued. She had that rare combination of physical attractiveness and genuine warmth that drew people to her naturally. Her online presence reflected this perfect balance between professional ambition and personal authenticity. On Instagram, where she had built a following of over 100,000 people, Melissa shared content that showcased both her modeling work and her real estate achievements. But unlike many influencers who only show the glamorous side of their lives, Melissa used her platform to inspire others and share genuine moments from her journey. Her followers weren't just admiring her photos, they were connecting with her story and feeling motivated by her success. The bond between Melissa and her sister Jordan was something that everyone noticed. Jordan Pauline, who was building her own career as a rising pop star, frequently posted about their unbreakable connection. To Jordan, Melissa wasn't just a sister. She was her best friend, her biggest supporter, and her safe space in a world that could be harsh and competitive. Family and friends often remarked on how inseparable the two sisters were, describing their relationship as something truly special and rare. This close family connection becomes even more important when you understand what happened in Melissa's final days. On September 6, 2023, Melissa went out with friends to a popular bar in Los Angeles. It was a normal night out, the kind of evening that thousands of young people in the city experience every week. They returned to her apartment, and the next morning she even made a FaceTime call with her cousin. During that call, she appeared relaxed, happy, and completely normal. Nobody who spoke with her that morning could have imagined it would be the last time they would ever hear her voice. What happened next remains partially mysterious, but investigators believe this is when Melissa made the fatal decision that would cost her life. According to friends, she had recently allowed someone to stay in her luxury apartment. This person was down on his luck, and Melissa, known for her generous heart and willingness to help others, offered him a place to stay temporarily. This act of kindness, the same generous spirit that made everyone love her, would ultimately lead to her death. For the next several days, Melissa seemed to vanish from the world completely. At first, her absence didn't raise immediate alarm. People assumed she might be busy with work, taking some personal time, or just dealing with the normal demands of life. But as the days continued to pass, her silence became increasingly concerning. Melissa had always been reliable, quick to respond to messages, and especially attentive to her sister Jordan. By September 10th, her family knew with absolute certainty that something was terribly wrong. The woman who never went more than a few hours without checking in with her loved ones had been completely silent for days. Her sister Jordan grew frantic and reached out to police, desperately begging them to perform a wellness check on Melissa's apartment. But when officers first knocked on her door and saw no obvious signs of danger from the outside, they left without forcing entry, assuring the family that everything appeared normal. But Melissa's family refused to accept this explanation. They knew her better than anyone, and they knew she would never disappear without telling someone where she was going. The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights and mounting terror for Melissa's family. Her sister Jordan was calling her phone constantly, leaving desperate voicemails that would never be answered. Friends began checking all her social media accounts, hopping for any sign of life, but her Instagram and other platforms had gone completely silent. For someone who had been so active online, sharing her daily life with over 100,000 followers, this sudden digital disappearance was completely out of character and deeply alarming. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. While Melissa's family was frantically searching for answers, they had no idea that she was already dead, hidden just a few feet away from where officers had knocked on her door days earlier. The killer had been so calculated, so careful in concealing her body, that even trained police officers couldn't detect anything wrong during their initial visit. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. This was something much more sinister. By September 12th, Melissa's mother had reached her absolute breaking point. The agony of not knowing where her daughter was, combined with the growing certainty that something terrible had happened, pushed her to demand another welfare check. This time, her desperation was so intense that police took her concerns much more seriously. With the help of the building manager, officers obtained a spare key and prepared to enter Melissa's apartment for a thorough search. What they found inside would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes that veteran Los Angeles investigators had ever encountered. At first glance, the apartment still looked deceptively normal. Melissa's belongings were neatly arranged, her furniture was in perfect order, and there were no obvious signs of a struggle in the main living areas. But experienced detectives know that the most important clues are often hidden in the smallest details. The kitchen told a completely different story. Food was sitting out on the counters, exactly as if someone had been in the middle of preparing a meal and had simply walked away, never to return. Dishes were left half-finished, ingredients were scattered around, and everything suggested that whatever happened to Melissa had occurred suddenly and without warning. But then came the detail that made every officer in that room freeze with horror. A dark, thick liquid was seeping out from underneath the refrigerator, creating an ominous pool on the kitchen floor. Every person in that apartment knew immediately what they were looking at, but nothing could have prepared them for the nightmare they were about to uncover. When they opened the refrigerator door, the sight that greeted them would haunt these seasoned professionals for the rest of their lives. Melissa's body was crammed inside the refrigerator like she was just another item to be stored and hidden away. She was bound with electrical cords, gagged to prevent any cries for help, and wearing only her underwear. The positioning of her body and the obvious signs of severe physical trauma made it clear that she had endured unimaginable suffering before her life was taken. This wasn't just murder. This was torture, followed by a deliberate attempt to hide the evidence and delay discovery. But the cruelty didn't end with her death. While investigators were processing this horrific crime scene, they discovered that Melissa's phone, laptop, and designer handbag were missing. These weren't just random thefts. The killer had taken specific items that could be used to taunt her family and maintain the illusion that she was still alive somewhere. And that's exactly what happened next. In the days following her murder, Melissa's family received messages that appeared to come from her phone. These texts were designed to make her loved ones believe she was okay and just needed some space. Can you imagine the psychological torture of receiving messages from your murdered daughter's phone, not knowing that the person sending them was actually her killer? The family was desperate for any sign that Melissa was safe, so they clung to these messages as proof that she was alive, never realizing they were being manipulated by the very person who had ended her life. The forensic examination revealed details that made this case even more disturbing. Melissa had suffered blunt force trauma to her face, head, back, and left arm. The pattern of injuries suggested that she had fought desperately for her life, but her attacker had overpowered her through sheer violence and brutality. The medical examiner couldn't pinpoint a single cause of death because the level of violence had been so extensive, but they ruled it homicidal violence without any doubt. Toxicology results showed that Melissa had alcohol and illegal substances in her system at the time of her death. This detail becomes crucial when you understand that she might have been in a vulnerable state when she was attacked, possibly unable to defend herself effectively or call for help. The killer may have deliberately waited for a moment when she was at her most defenseless before launching his brutal assault. But investigators also found something that would provide their first real lead in identifying the murderer. Security camera footage from the building's elevator and hallways told a chilling story that no one was prepared for. On September 6th, the last day anyone saw Melissa alive, the cameras showed her entering the building looking completely normal and relaxed. She appeared happy, comfortable, and safe in her own home. However, the footage from September 7th revealed something that sent chills down the spines of every detective working the case. An unknown man was captured on camera using Melissa's own key fob to enter the elevator and access her apartment. He was carrying plastic bags and appeared completely casual, as if he belonged there. The most disturbing part was watching him leave the building hours later, locking the door behind him and walking away as if nothing had happened. This security footage proved several terrifying facts about Melissa's murder. First, this wasn't a random break-in or a crime committed by a stranger. This was someone who had access to her keys, someone she had trusted enough to give entry to her home. Second, the casual way he moved through the building suggested he was familiar with the layout and comfortable being there. Third, the fact that he took the time to lock the door behind him showed a level of calculation and planning that made this crime even more sinister. But just when investigators thought they had their first solid lead to follow, Another tragedy struck that would send shockwaves through the entire Los Angeles community and raise terrifying questions about whether they were dealing with something much larger than a single murder. 2 days before Melissa's body was discovered, another young woman was found dead in her apartment less than a mile away. 32-year-old Nicole Coates, who was also an aspiring model trying to make it in Los Angeles, was discovered lifeless in her bed. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Two beautiful young women, both pursuing modeling careers, both found dead in their apartments within days of each other in the same area of the city. The media exploded with terrifying headlines, and whispers of a serial killer targeting models spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Nicole's family refused to accept the official ruling of accidental overdose. They pointed to disturbing details that suggested she had been fighting for her life before she died. Her body was positioned with one leg bent, as if she had been kicking and struggling against an attacker. But police insisted there was no forensic evidence connecting the two cases and urged the public not to panic about a serial killer targeting young women in the modeling industry. However, the fear was already spreading throughout Los Angeles. Young women who lived alone began double-checking their locks, installing additional security measures, and questioning whether they could trust anyone in their lives. The idea that someone might be specifically targeting models created a wave of terror that reached far beyond just those working in the fashion industry. Social media was filled with warnings, safety tips, and terrified posts from young women who suddenly realized they might be potential targets. But while the community was focused on the possibility of a serial killer, investigators working Melissa's case were following a much more personal and disturbing lead. Through interviews with Melissa's friends and family, they learned about the man who had been staying in her apartment in the days leading up to her death. This person had a name: Magnus Daniel Humphrey, a 41-year-old man who had allegedly been down on his luck when Melissa opened her home to him out of pure compassion and generosity. When detectives ran a background check on Magnus Humphrey, what they discovered was absolutely shocking. This wasn't some unfortunate person who had simply fallen on hard times. This was a man with a criminal history so extensive and violent that it should have kept him locked away from society years earlier. The pattern of violence and the repeated failures of the justice system to stop him would prove to be one of the most infuriating aspects of Melissa's entire case. Humphrey's criminal record read like a horror story spanning over 2 decades. In 1999, he was arrested in Illinois for aggravated assault, though those charges were eventually dropped. By 2002, he was facing drug possession and distribution charges in Minnesota. In 2009, he was convicted of second-degree felony assault and was prohibited from possessing firearms. By 2013, he had been convicted again, this time for degree felony assault. He had also served time in federal prison and faced charges for false imprisonment, aggravated robbery, harassment of women, and multiple drug-related offenses. The most disturbing part wasn't just the number of charges, but the pattern they revealed. This was a man who had been repeatedly violent toward others, particularly women, and who had somehow managed to avoid serious long-term consequences for his actions. Many of his cases had ended in dismissals, plea bargains, or reduced charges that allowed him to remain free to harm others. The justice system had failed multiple times to recognize the danger he posed, and Melissa Mooney paid the ultimate price for those failures. According to prosecutors, Melissa had opened her home to Humphrey out of trust and compassion, never knowing about his violent past or the danger she was placing herself in. Her generous heart, the same quality that made everyone love her, became the very thing that led to her brutal death. It's a tragic reminder of how goodness and kindness can sometimes be exploited by those who have no conscience or humanity left in them. The manhunt for Magnus Humphrey lasted nearly 2 months, during which time the entire community lived in fear. Residents of Melissa's building were terrified that the killer might still be among them, possibly planning his next attack. Women throughout Los Angeles changed their daily routines, avoided being alone, and questioned every person they allowed into their lives. The psychological impact of Melissa's murder extended far beyond her immediate family and friends. On November 3, 2023, nearly 2 months after Melissa's murder, law enforcement finally tracked Magnus Humphrey down in Minneapolis, Minnesota. With the cooperation of federal marshals, he was arrested and extradited back to Los Angeles to face charges for Melissa's death. The news of his capture brought a mixture of relief and rage to Melissa's community. Finally, there was a face to attach to the nightmare that had shattered their sense of security. At Humphrey's arraignment, prosecutors laid out the horrifying details of what they believed had happened to Melissa. They stated that Magnus had beaten her, bound her with electrical cords, gagged her to prevent any cries for help, and then stuffed her body inside her own refrigerator like she was nothing more than an object to be hidden away. But the cruelty didn't end there. Prosecutors also revealed that he had stolen her phone, laptop, and designer handbag, and had used her own phone to send taunting messages to her grieving family members. Can you imagine the psychological torture of receiving what you think are messages from your missing daughter, only to later discover they were sent by the very person who murdered her? The level of calculated cruelty involved in this crime goes beyond simple murder. This was psychological warfare against a family that was already suffering unimaginable grief and terror. The fact that he used Melissa's own voice, through her phone, to torment the people who loved her most shows a level of evil that is difficult to comprehend. Magnus Humphrey was ordered to remain in custody without bail while awaiting trial. If convicted of all charges, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Melissa's family, nothing less than a life sentence would be acceptable. They had lost their beloved daughter and sister to a man who should never have been free to harm anyone, and they were determined to ensure he would never have the opportunity to destroy another family. The question that haunts everyone who follows this case is simple. Why? Why did Magnus kill Melissa? Some experts speculate about financial motives, pointing to her stolen belongings that were never recovered. Others suggest it was about power and control, classic motivations for this type of predatory violence. Still, others wonder if there was some kind of personal falling out or rejection that triggered his murderous rage. But prosecutors have acknowledged that the exact motive may never be fully understood, and in some ways, it doesn't matter. What matters is that a beautiful, generous young woman is dead because she tried to help someone who didn't deserve her kindness. Melissa's story serves as both a tragedy and a warning. It reminds us that evil can hide behind a mask of need and desperation, and that our natural desire to help others must be balanced with reasonable caution and safety measures. It also highlights the critical importance of comprehensive background checks and the failures of a justice system that repeatedly allowed a dangerous predator to remain free. Today, Melissa's family continues their fight for justice, holding onto the hope that her killer will spend the rest of his life behind bars where he belongs. They've also become advocates for other families dealing with similar tragedies, using their pain to help prevent future victims. Their strength and determination in the face of unimaginable loss is truly inspiring. What do you think about this case? Should Magnus Humphrey face the death penalty, or is life in prison without parole sufficient justice for Melissa? Do you think the justice system failed by not stopping him earlier? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that expose the darkest corners of human behavior and honor the victims who deserve to be remembered.